On 10th March 2009, Luton became the starting point for a street protest movement. Soldiers from the Royal Anglian Regiment were marching through the town centre in a homecoming parade after returning from Iraq. The atmosphere was tense. Crowds were watching, police were nearby. Then a small group of Islamist extremists began to protest. Placards appeared, some attacking the soldiers as butchers of Basra. The backlash from the local community was immediate and angry. That anger did not just fade away. Within months, it had produced local organising in Luton, and from that local anger, a wider street protest movement began to take shape. The English Defence League, the EDL, as it became known, made itself visible in British city centres using a very specific set of tools: flags, marches, chants, police lines and confrontation. Its most recognisable figure was a man named Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon. But this story was not just about the rise and fall of a street movement. When the EDL declined, the story continued. Robinson moved from the streets to online media, from protests to court cases, and from a local backlash to a much bigger argument about free speech, public order, and the rule of law in modern Britain. The English Defence League did not appear out of nowhere, fully formed. After that Luton parade, local anger gave rise to groups like United People of Luton. Then wider networks became involved, groups like Casuals United, with links to football firm culture. That mix of local grievance and confrontational subculture was crucial. The EDL was not built like a political party. It did not write policy papers or run election campaigns. It built power through visibility. It took to the streets with marches, flags and chants, creating confrontations that could draw national attention onto local issues. How people saw this movement depended heavily on where they stood. Supporters described the EDL as a movement against Islamic extremism. They argued it gave a voice to ordinary people who felt that politicians, police and the media were avoiding difficult questions about extremism, immigration and what it meant to be English. Researchers and critics, however, described it very differently. They commonly classified it as a far-right and anti-Islam street protest movement. They argued that even when the EDL claimed it was only opposing extremists, its demonstrations often created a wider atmosphere of hostility and fear toward Muslim communities. This disagreement became central to the movement's identity. To its supporters, the EDL was saying things that others were too afraid to say. To its critics, it was turning public fear into pressure against a broad religious minority. And to police forces and local councils across the country, it was, quite simply, a public order problem. EDL demonstrations meant supporters, counter-protesters, heavy police lines, and the constant risk of disorder. This was part of the movement's power. It could make itself impossible to ignore, but it was also one of its greatest weaknesses. The more visible the EDL became, the more controversial it became. And Tommy Robinson became the face of that visibility. He was direct, confrontational, and knew how to use the media. To his supporters, he sounded like someone finally willing to say publicly what they only thought privately. To his critics, he became the symbol of a divisive and inflammatory movement, say EDL. And many people thought of Tommy Robinson, say Tommy Robinson. And many people thought of the EDL. The two became almost inseparable, but movements built on street energy are difficult to sustain. Demonstrations need numbers, momentum, organisation and control. They also attract pressure from police, local councils, journalists, opponents and internal factions. By 2013, the EDL was weaker. Its public image had become increasingly tied to disorder, confrontation and association with far-right extremism. That year, Robinson announced he was leaving the organisation. At a press conference with the counter-extremism think tank Quilliam, he said that street demonstrations had brought the movement to a point, but were no longer productive. He also acknowledged the danger of far-right extremism. It seemed like an ending, but it was not. Robinson's exit did not end his public role. It changed the arena. The street movement declined, but his audience did not disappear. His activity shifted online to videos, independent media, interviews, rallies, and direct communication with his followers. This was a critical shift. A street movement needed thousands of people in one place at one time. An online personality did not. A march could lose momentum. A video could travel instantly. A personality could survive even when the organisation around him faded. The centre of gravity moved from the street to the platform. From this new platform, Robinson increasingly focused on grooming-gang cases, child sexual exploitation, and claims that British institutions had failed victims. The subject he focused on was not imaginary. Official inquiries, including the Rotherham inquiry, documented serious failures around child sexual exploitation. The Rotherham report found evidence that at least 1,400 children were sexually exploited between 1997 and 2013. Those failures created real public anger. But the legal trouble that followed Robinson was different. It was not about whether those crimes mattered. It was about whether his conduct around live court proceedings risked undermining the possibility of a fair trial. In the UK, courts can impose reporting restrictions to protect active legal proceedings. This is especially important in linked trials, where media coverage of one case could prejudice the jury in a later one. That was the central issue in 2018, when Robinson live-streamed outside Leeds Crown Court during one of 3 linked Huddersfield child sexual exploitation trials. His supporters called it citizen journalism, shining a light on serious crimes. But after fresh proceedings in 2019, the High Court found him in contempt of court. The judges ruled that he breached reporting restrictions and created a serious risk to the administration of justice. And that highlights the crucial difference between a political argument and the legal process. Supporters may ask why the public should not hear about serious crimes. But a court has to ask a different question. Does reporting on this case right now risk prejudicing it? Those are not the same question. A later case showed a different kind of legal boundary. This one was not about a criminal trial. It was about a civil libel case. In 2021, a Syrian refugee named Jamal Hijazi successfully sued Robinson for libel. After the judgment, the court issued an injunction preventing Robinson from repeating the allegations the court had found defamatory. In 2024, Robinson admitted 10 breaches of that court order through online films, social media posts, YouTube material, and interviews. Mr. Justice Johnson committed him to prison for 18 months, less 3 days, the form of imprisonment courts use to enforce their own orders. The judge's reasoning was simple. Court orders are not optional. A person can disagree with a legal outcome. They can criticize it, but they cannot simply ignore an injunction because their audience believes they are right. And that is where the story moved again. From street protest to online platform to direct conflict with the courtroom. It is why the story of the EDL still matters long after the street protests faded. The organisation became less central, but the style of politics it represented did not vanish. Street visibility became digital visibility. A movement's identity became the influence of a personality. Public order questions on the street became legal questions about platforms, reporting restrictions, injunctions, and the authority of the courts. For his supporters, Robinson remains a figure who speaks about issues they believe the establishment has ignored. For his critics, he remains a figure whose methods inflame division and repeatedly cross legal lines. But for the courts, the question is narrower. It is not whether he is popular or unpopular. It is not whether his audience agrees with him. It is simply whether legal rules were broken. And that brings us to the core question. How does a protest movement become a media identity? How does that identity keep the idea of a movement alive after the organisation itself has declined? And what happens when that influence collides with the courts? The story of Tommy Robinson and the EDL is not just a story about one man or one group. It is a story about the changing face of protest politics in Britain. A journey from the street to the platform to the courtroom boundary. Next time, who organises Britain's Palestine protests?